Montana Territory, January 1887. The thermometer read negative 45 degrees with winds screaming at 50 miles per hour. Ranchers who'd spent thousands on heated barns, burning coal around the clock, watched their $150 thoroughbred horses freeze solid despite every modern comfort they could provide, entire fortunes wiped out in weeks. But while his neighbors lost 60% of their livestock, Henrik Svensen's 12 horses were thriving. Not in a heated barn, not with expensive coal stoves, but in what locals called his crazy hole in the ground, a crude excavation that cost him $30 in materials while his neighbors burned through hundreds monthly just on fuel. How is this possible? What did this Norwegian immigrant understand about surviving brutal winters that wealthy established ranchers had completely forgotten? The answer lies buried in wisdom so simple, so elegant, that ignoring it cost fortunes and lives. The winter of 1887 carved its name into Montana Territory history with a brutality that defied comprehension. When the mercury dropped to negative 45 degrees and winds howled across the plains at 50 miles per hour, creating wind chills that approached negative 70, even the most prepared ranchers watched their investments freeze solid in their stalls. These weren't cheap range ponies left to fend for themselves. These were thoroughbred horses worth $150 each, equivalent to $4,500 today, housed in heated barns that had cost their owners $2,000 to construct and $300 monthly to heat with coal. The Powder River region had never seen anything like it. 89 consecutive days below zero, with temperatures that turned spit into ice before it hit the ground, and made steel so brittle it snapped like kindling. Ranchers who prided themselves on modern methods had spared no expense preparing for harsh weather. They built their barns taller to capture more heat, installed multiple coal-burning stoves, and maintained round-the-clock shifts to feed those fires. Some even ran steam pipes through their stalls, creating heated floors that consumed coal faster than locomotives. But physics doesn't respect good intentions or deep pockets. Despite burning through hundreds of tons of coal, despite constant attention from hired hands, despite every modern convenience money could buy, the heated barns became death traps. The combination of extreme cold and fierce winds created thermal dynamics that sucked heat from buildings faster than coal stoves could replace it. Condensation from heated air froze on barn walls, creating ice barriers that conducted cold deeper into the structures. Pipes burst, stoves went out, and coal supplies ran dangerously low as temperatures remained locked in a killing range for weeks on end. By March, when the cold finally broke, the scope of the disaster became clear. Neighbors found livestock stacked like cordwood behind barn doors that had frozen shut. Horses that had survived the initial cold wave died from respiratory infections caused by the constant temperature fluctuations as fires burned hot then died to embers. The mortality rate across the region reached 60%, wiping out entire bloodlines and bankrupting ranchers who had invested everything in their herds. Yet in the midst of this catastrophe, one small ranch defied every prediction. Henrik Svensen, a Norwegian immigrant who his neighbors considered backward and stubborn, watched his 12 horses not just survive, but actually gain weight during the killing months. While ranchers with 10 times his resources lost fortunes, Svensen's horses emerged from winter in better condition than they had entered it. His secret wasn't modern heating technology or expensive imported coal. It wasn't even a traditional barn in any recognizable sense. What Svenson had built looked like nothing more than a crude hole carved into a hillside, a primitive shelter that his neighbors dismissed as the confused thinking of an old country immigrant who didn't understand American methods. They had mocked him the previous fall as he spent his days with a shovel instead of building upward like any sensible rancher. When winter arrived and temperatures plunged, their laughter turned to puzzled concern, then to desperate curiosity as their own expensive solutions failed catastrophically while Svenson's horses thrived in what they called his crazy underground stable. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Modern engineering, unlimited budgets, and conventional wisdom had produced disaster. A $30 excavation, guided by half-remembered advice from a Norwegian grandfather, had achieved the impossible. Henrik Svensen had arrived in Montana Territory 3 years earlier with little more than a determined spirit and memories of his grandfather's voice echoing across Norwegian mountainsides. The other ranchers saw him as another struggling immigrant, someone who worked hard but lacked the sophisticated understanding needed to thrive in American ranching. They had money, connections, and access to the latest agricultural knowledge from back east. Svenson had calloused hands and fragments of old country wisdom that seemed increasingly irrelevant in a land of endless horizons and modern possibilities. When the brutal summer of 1886 finally broke and autumn arrived, every experienced rancher in the Powder River region began the same familiar ritual. They ordered extra coal from Billings, hired additional hands for winter feeding, and made final improvements to their heated barns. Some installed new cast iron stoves. Others added extra layers of lumber to their walls or invested in improved ventilation systems that promised better heat distribution. The conversation at the general store centered on fuel costs, labor expenses, and the latest innovations in livestock shelter design. Svenson listened to these discussions with the polite attention of someone learning American ways, but when October arrived, he made a decision that baffled his neighbors completely. Instead of building higher or buying better stoves, he walked to a south-facing hillside 200 yards from the creek that ran behind his modest homestead. He stood there for nearly an hour, studying the slope, testing the soil with his boot, and examining the drainage patterns that most men would never notice. Then he went back to his cabin and returned with his shovel. The sight of Svenson digging into that hillside drew curious visitors and eventually outright ridicule. Tom Morrison, who owned the largest spread in the county, rode over one afternoon and watched Svenson work for several minutes before asking what in the world he was trying to accomplish. When Svenson explained that he was preparing winter shelter for his horses, Morrison laughed out loud. "You can't heat dirt, Henrik," he said, shaking his head. "Horses aren't prairie dogs. They need proper shelter, warm air, and protection from the wind." This is Montana Territory, not some mountain valley in Norway. Other neighbors joined the chorus of skepticism as Svenson's excavation grew deeper and wider throughout October. They watched him carry out wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of soil, creating what looked like nothing more than a crude cave carved into the hillside. Where were the walls? Where was the roof? How could any sensible man expect to keep valuable horses alive in a hole in the ground when temperatures dropped to 30 and 40 below zero? The whole enterprise seemed like the confused thinking of someone who simply didn't understand American methods. But Svenson continued digging, guided by his grandfather's voice and principles that his neighbors couldn't begin to comprehend. His grandfather had kept livestock alive in Norwegian winters that made Montana cold seem mild, and he had done it without the benefit of coal stoves or heated barns. The old man's words echoed in Henrik's memory as he worked. Work with the mountain, not against the weather. Let the earth do what the earth does best. Don't fight what you cannot change. By the first snowfall, Svenson had completed his underground stable. His neighbors rode by occasionally to inspect his progress, shaking their heads at what they saw. The structure looked primitive, almost pathetic compared to their heated barns with their gleaming stoves and carefully engineered ventilation systems. When December temperatures began their relentless descent toward the killing cold of January, the conventional wisdom seemed vindicated. Heated barns made sense. Underground holes did not. Then the winter of death arrived, and everything everyone thought they knew about keeping horses alive in extreme cold proved catastrophically wrong. What Svenson understood, and what his neighbors had never learned, was that the earth itself was the most reliable heating system ever created. 6 feet below the Montana surface, regardless of whether the air temperature read positive 70 or negative 45 degrees, the ground maintained a constant temperature between 45 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. This wasn't folklore or wishful thinking. This was physics as reliable as gravity, a thermal battery that had been storing and releasing the sun's energy for millions of years without requiring coal, maintenance, or human intervention of any kind. The insulation value of Svenson's earth walls dwarfed anything his neighbors could afford to install in their heated barns. 3 feet of compacted earth provided an insulation rating equivalent to R60, the same protection that would require multiple layers of modern foam insulation costing $8 per square foot. His neighbors' barns, even the most expensive ones, rarely achieved insulation values above R20. They were fighting Montana winters with walls that were thermally inferior to what Svenson had created by simply moving dirt with a shovel. But the earth walls were only part of the thermal equation that Svenson's grandfather had understood intuitively. 12,000-pound horses generate approximately 15,000 BTUs of heat per hour through their normal metabolic processes. That's more thermal output than a small furnace, enough to heat a modest house on a moderately cold day. In a conventional barn, this precious heat escaped through walls, roofs, and ventilation systems designed to prevent moisture buildup. The horses were essentially heating the entire Montana territory, 1 BTU at a time. Svenson's underground design captured and stored every bit of that biological heat. The earth walls didn't just insulate. They functioned as thermal mass, absorbing heat during the day and radiating it back at night. When the horses moved around, breathed, and digested their feed, they were charging a massive thermal battery that surrounded them on 3 sides and extended deep into the hillside. The temperature swings that killed animals in conventional barns simply couldn't occur in a system where thousands of tons of earth moderated every thermal change. The ventilation system that emerged naturally from Svenson's design solved another critical problem that stumped builders of heated barns. Fresh air entered the stable through the low entrance, was warmed by contact with the earth walls and the horses themselves, then rose and circulated throughout the space before exiting through carefully positioned gaps near the roof line. This created constant air movement without the deadly drafts that plagued conventional barns, where wind-driven air changes could drop temperatures by 20 degrees in minutes. The physics were elegant in their simplicity. Warm air rises, cold air sinks. Earth stores heat. Animals generate heat. These weren't revolutionary discoveries requiring engineering degrees or expensive equipment. They were natural principles that had governed thermodynamics since the Earth formed. Svenson's grandfather had learned to work with these forces rather than against them, creating systems that required no fuel, no maintenance, and no expertise beyond careful observation of how the natural world actually operated. While his neighbors fought the Montana winter with coal stoves and heated air, burning through their savings one shovelful of coal at a time, Svenson had partnered with forces that operated independently of human effort or expense. His horses weren't surviving despite the underground location. They were thriving because of it. Every aspect of their shelter worked in harmony with natural systems that had been regulating temperature, managing moisture, and moving air long before humans discovered fire or learned to mine coal. The revelation was as profound as it was practical. The most sophisticated thermal management system available in Montana Territory cost $30 in materials and operated without consuming a single piece of coal. The excavation itself required precision that Svenson's neighbors never suspected. 8 feet into the hillside, 24 feet wide, and 40 feet long, with each dimension calculated for specific thermal and structural reasons that his grandfather's teachings had made clear. The depth of 8 feet ensured that the back wall remained in constant contact with earth that never experienced temperature fluctuations. The 24-foot width provided adequate space for 12 horses while maintaining the proper ratio of animal heat to earth mass. The 40-foot length created sufficient air volume for healthy respiration without losing thermal efficiency to excessive space. Svenson began construction in early October with 2 neighbors who had agreed to help, more out of curiosity than conviction. The foundation required 6 inches of carefully graded gravel to prevent moisture from wicking up through the floor, a detail that seemed insignificant until the spring thaw revealed that conventional barns throughout the region suffered from chronic dampness problems that weakened their structures and sickened their livestock. Behind the excavation, Svenson installed a French drain system using fieldstones and coarse gravel, directing groundwater away from the stable and preventing the foundation problems that plagued surface buildings constructed without understanding of subsurface water movement. The wall construction revealed the sophisticated engineering hidden within what appeared to be primitive methods. Svenson selected 200 fieldstones from the creek bed, choosing each one for specific size and shape characteristics that would create interlocking strength without requiring excessive mortar. He mixed his lime mortar using ratios his grandfather had taught him, creating a binding agent that would cure slowly in the cool earth environment while maintaining flexibility during freeze-thaw cycles that cracked the rigid mortared walls of conventional barns. The roofing system demonstrated the elegant complexity of traditional knowledge applied to local materials. 12 pine logs, each 14 inches in diameter, were positioned as load-bearing beams capable of supporting the 3 feet of earth that would provide both insulation and thermal mass above the horses. These logs were sourced from trees that Svenson had felled the previous winter, allowing them to cure properly and develop the strength characteristics necessary for long-term structural integrity. Between the logs, he laid smaller timbers and then a layer of tar paper, the only modern material in the entire construction to provide waterproofing that would prevent roof leaks from compromising the earth insulation above. The entrance design embodied principles that modern builders consistently misunderstood. The door opening measured only 4 feet in height, just tall enough for horses to enter comfortably, but low enough to create a natural thermal barrier that prevented warm air from escaping. This low entrance worked with natural convection principles, trapping heated air in the upper portions of the stable where the horses spent most of their time, while cooler outside air remained near the floor level, where it could be gradually warmed before mixing with the stable atmosphere. The ventilation system emerged from careful positioning of air gaps rather than mechanical systems that required maintenance and consumed energy. Small openings near the roofline allowed stale air to escape, while larger gaps near the entrance permitted fresh air to enter, creating a circulation pattern driven entirely by temperature differentials. This natural airflow prevented the carbon dioxide buildup that could suffocate animals while avoiding the heat loss associated with mechanical ventilation systems. The entire construction process required 6 weeks of part-time work and cost $28 in materials. The lime mortar accounted for $12, the tar paper for $8, and various hardware for the remaining $8. The labor was provided by Svenson and his 2 neighbors, men who learned traditional building techniques while creating a structure that would outperform buildings costing 50 times as much to construct and hundreds of times as much to operate. When winter arrived and temperatures plunged toward the killing range, Svenson's investment in forgotten knowledge would prove its worth against the most brutal test nature could provide. When the January blizzard arrived with the fury that would define the winter of 1887, it brought temperatures that challenged every assumption about survival in the American West. The mercury dropped to negative 45 degrees and stayed there for days, while winds sustained at 50 miles per hour created conditions that no amount of preparation seemed adequate to address. This was the test that would separate working solutions from expensive failures, and the results would be measured in frozen carcasses and financial ruin. Tom Morrison's heated barn, which had cost him over $2,000 to construct and outfit with the finest cast iron stoves money could buy, became a death trap within 48 hours. Despite burning coal continuously and maintaining round-the-clock shifts to tend the fires, the interior temperature dropped to 15 degrees above zero. The horses closest to the stoves suffered from smoke inhalation, while those near the walls froze to death in their stalls. Morrison lost 7 of his 12 thoroughbreds and spent over $800 on coal during the 3-week cold snap, watching his investment disappear one frozen morning at a time. The pattern repeated across every ranch that had invested in modern heating solutions. Pipes burst despite constant fires. Condensation from heated air froze on barn walls, creating thermal bridges that conducted deadly cold directly into the structures. Coal supplies ran dangerously low as stoves consumed fuel faster than wagons could deliver it from town. The more sophisticated the heating system, the more catastrophic its failure when temperatures dropped beyond the range that mechanical systems could reasonably address. Meanwhile, inside Svenson's underground stable, a different reality prevailed entirely. The interior temperature held steady at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, while surface temperatures plunged to their killing extremes. His horses moved comfortably through their daily routines, eating normally, maintaining their body weight, and showing none of the stress behaviors that characterized animals struggling to survive in hostile environments. The stable required no fuel, no maintenance, and no human intervention beyond normal feeding and watering schedules. The thermal dynamics that Svenson had harnessed proved their reliability under the most severe conditions imaginable. The earth walls stored and released heat with the consistency of a perfectly calibrated furnace, moderating temperature swings and maintaining the stable environment that horses required for healthy metabolism. The natural ventilation system continued functioning effectively, providing fresh air without the heat loss that plagued mechanical systems. Most remarkably, the horses actually gained an average of 40 pounds each during the winter months, their bodies converting feed efficiently in the stable temperatures that never stressed their metabolic systems. Word of Svenson's success spread gradually through the territory as neighbors compared their devastating losses to his complete success. Men who had dismissed his methods as primitive ignorance now sought him out for detailed explanations of his construction techniques. The two neighbors who had helped with the excavation found themselves in high demand as consultants, their first-hand knowledge of earth-sheltered construction suddenly valuable beyond measure. By the spring of 1888, the transformation was remarkable. 47 earth-sheltered livestock facilities were under construction across Montana and Wyoming, built by ranchers who had learned the hard way that working with natural systems produced better results than fighting them with expensive technology. The designs varied based on local conditions and available materials, but the fundamental principles remained consistent. Dig deep enough to reach stable earth temperatures, insulate with thermal mass rather than air gaps, and create ventilation systems that worked with natural convection rather than against it. Modern earth-sheltered building principles have validated every aspect of what Svenson's grandfather understood intuitively. Today's earth-sheltered homes routinely save 50 to 70% on heating costs while providing superior comfort and durability compared to conventional construction. The physics haven't changed. The Earth still maintains constant temperatures 6 feet below the surface. Animals still generate heat through normal metabolism. Natural convection still moves air more efficiently than most mechanical systems. The forgotten wisdom that saved Svenson's horses in 1887 remains as reliable today as it was then, waiting for anyone wise enough to dig down instead of building up.